Hi, this is Mary from the Daily Sew. This video is about how to do a forward shoulder adjustment. This is also one in a series of videos on how to get a better fit. So if you're ready, let's go. Many patterns are drafted for a body with stick straight posture, much like this mannequin here, but in reality, our shoulders curve slightly forward. Now this can happen naturally with age, and it can happen if you sit at a desk all day. If you notice that the shoulder seam is pulling back, if you have a lot of wrinkles at the neck or the back armhole, or maybe the set-in sleeve has a lot of wrinkles in the back here and might feel uncomfortable, then your shoulder seam is too far back and you need to move it slightly forward. Unfortunately, you don't know you need this adjustment until after you've sewn the final garment or the test garment if you were smart enough to make one of those. But once you know you need this adjustment, you can go ahead and make it on all future patterns, at least from the same company, or at least you know now to check that shoulder seam placement on all future sewing patterns. This forward shoulder adjustment is for the typical adjustments of 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter or less. And while that may not sound like enough to even bother with, just even 1/4 of an inch adjustment can make a difference in the fit and the appearance of the garment. This is what handmade clothing is all about, a custom fit. To find out how much you need to move your shoulder seam forward, let's start with the 2 possible starting points. Starting place 1, you have the garment or test garment sewn. Put the garment on. The shoulder seam should go from the neck to the middle of your upper arm. Mark with tailor's chalk where the top and middle of your upper arm is. This is how far forward to move the seam line. Starting place 2. You haven't made a test garment yet, but you suspect you need to move the shoulder seam forward. You're going to cut out your front and back bodice pieces from muslin, cheap non-woven interfacing, or Swedish tracing paper, something you can try on. But you want to extend that shoulder seam allowance to 1 inch. Draw in the shoulder seam line. Stay stitch the neckline of both pieces so they don't stretch out of shape when trying it on, and sew the front and back pieces together at the side seams. Don't sew the shoulder seam. You start at the original seam line, the line that you marked on your test garment, at the neck, on the original seam line, pin it shut. Then come down to the middle of the top of your arm. On the mannequin, it's a little more straight, but I'm going to pin it as if it isn't. And you would just pin it shut here. And that'll give you the place that you start, and it gives you the place where you will finish your shoulder seam. Transfer the adjustment to your pattern. Measure the distance between the original seam line and where you marked on the garment, or measure from the drawn-in seam line to where you pinned. That amount will be added to the back pattern piece and taken away from the front. We're going to start with the front piece. You're going to bring the shoulder seam forward the amount you need. Draw in your seam allowance first. At the armhole, measure down from the seam line the amount you are bringing the seam forward. Remember, this should be no more than 3/8 inch or 1 centimeter. Go ahead and make a mark. Start on the original seam line at the neck and redraw the shoulder seam from the neck to your mark at the armhole. Add back in your seam allowance before you forget. If there is a notch, just transfer it over. Cut off any excess paper. And then we need to add to the back bodice piece. You could just add what you cut off to the back shoulder. Really, you could just tape it together. But let me show you what you're doing to the back bodice to make the adjustment. First, add some paper to the back bodice pattern at the shoulder. After marking in the seam allowance, you're going to add the amount you took away from the front piece to the back piece. Remember to start on the original seam line at the neck. Add seam allowance and transfer the notch if you have one. And see, it's the same as simply adding the piece I cut off the front. So there's a shortcut if you want it. Now check that the pattern pieces line up. Fold back the seam allowance on one of the pattern pieces. If you had a notch, you would start with lining the notches up. But if you don't, line the seams up at the neckline and walk the pattern toward the armhole. And you can see my front piece is a tad wider than my back piece. Now this is a super tiny amount and I could just ignore it, but when one piece is longer than the other, you split the difference and you add half to the narrower piece and take away the other half from the wider piece. As you know, most patterns with a set-in sleeve have you line up the top of the sleeve cap to the shoulder seam. Well, you just move your shoulder seam forward. Do you move the sleeve cap notch forward too? No, you leave your notch where it is. Line up your sleeve notch with your new shoulder seam, and that moves the sleeve forward, which is what you need. This is the top of your arm, and your arm wasn't back here. Your arm was forward. That was part of the problem. So now you just brought it forward. Done and done. Good job, you. Well, I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below and I'll be sure to reply. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.